Story 1. Taps. As a child, I had always thought I knew what true fear was. The fear of something hiding under your bed or in your closet. Hell, I thought clowns were the scariest shit there was. Of course, I hadn't known the feeling of real fear. Hadn't experienced it until I was 12. They say people are most afraid of the unknown, of things they can't quite explain. Things they can't see, unexplainable sounds in the dark, paranoid thoughts of monsters creeping in the unoccupied spots of their bedroom. These are the things that people are most afraid of, so they say. This wasn't exactly true for my case. Sure, sounds in the darkness were a factor, but I knew the source behind the sounds. Oh, I knew, and the knowledge of the source drove terror into me, like a mallet rhythmically driving a nail into me, over and over and over. I don't know how it started. It was as if a switch was flipped in her, and suddenly she became an uncontrollable marionette. Oh, the irony. My father tried to stop her, but she persisted, and he eventually gave up trying. I suggested that he call the police or tell the neighbors, but he dismissed 12-year-old me and told me he didn't trust those corrupt government lackeys, and sure as hell didn't want the neighbors finding out. They'd have immediately call that wretched 3-number hotline. Besides, he told me, she isn't harming either of us. I had hoped it would stay that way. She sure didn't seem like my mom anymore, and I told him so. He yelled at me and scolded me, calling me foolish. I wanted to shout back at him, telling him he has no idea how scared I am every night, hearing her, but I didn't. Mother was fine in the morning and for most of the afternoon as well, although she was always in bed, occasionally sitting up just to stare at the blank wall a few feet past the foot of her bed. She seemed as fine as her condition would deem it. Father was at work. He usually works until 2 in the morning or so. When my mother first started acting weird, he was afraid to leave me alone, so he took a few days off from work. He didn't dare hire a babysitter. He trusted those people just as much as he trusted the government. After a few days, he figured it was safe enough to leave me at home, alone with her, and resumed leaving for work every morning. Take care of your mother, he would always tell me before he left. I simply nodded, and in reality, instead of taking care of her, I hid from her. But for the most part, she was fine until evening. It was only at night, when I am huddled under the covers in my bedroom, that she begins acting up. That's when the noises start. I would hear her get out of bed in my parents' bedroom and hear her crawl across the hall, making her way to my bedroom. After the first night, I always remembered to keep my door locked. She would crawl, I would hear her crawl, all the way to the front of my bedroom door, and then the tapping began. They were just light taps, like how a student would knock at the door of the principal's office. But the taps, they went on for some time, just a constant, steady tap. I remember clamping my eyes shut, trying to ignore it and go to sleep. And after almost an hour of tapping, it stopped, and I slowly opened my eyes. That's when I realized the door wasn't locked, and there she was, at the foot of my bed, just standing there, staring at me. The fear I felt was real, and it sure wasn't caused by the unknown. My eyes were open, looking at my own mother that was merely a label at this point stare at me. There was something unnatural about her eyes. I think it was her pupils. They were dilated to the point of being dots, just little black dots. There she was, just staring at me, not doing anything else. She didn't hurt me, She just stood there, but there was something terrifying about it. Maybe it was her eyes. Maybe it did have something to do with the unknown. Not knowing what she would do next. Not knowing if she would spring at me and attack. But nothing had happened. My father eventually came home from work and was greeted with the sight of his wife, only a label now, and his son, covered in sweat and fear. The days following that incident, I had always kept my door locked. I double-check the lock even to this day. Of course, that didn't stop the tapping sounds. Sometimes I swear they weren't even coming from outside my door. Sometimes it felt like they were coming from the window or the closet or even under my damn bed. Fear of the unknown. That's always how it is, one way or another, I suppose. That was when I had my first encounter with true fear, at the age of 12. Every day after that, the door was always locked. Eventually, my mother passed away cardiac arrest right outside my bedroom. My father opted to bury her in the backyard. Can't go trusting those morticians now, and I moved out. I tried to convince my father to live with me, but he refuses to let go of our old house. He was always a stubborn man. Life has gotten much better for me since I landed a high-paying job at a law firm, and next week I have a date with this beaut of a woman I met a few days back. But every single night before I fall asleep, as I lay under a new set of covers I bought, I could almost swear. I swear I could still hear the tapping noses. Story 2. The Watchers. It was getting dark fast. I needed to get home soon. Otherwise, I would be stuck traveling the back roads by the light of a quarter moon. I quickened my pace in an effort to make it in time. I wasn't going fast enough. The little light I had left was now nearly gone. As I turned the corner going into the subdivision where I live, the sun left the sky completely and handed its shift over to the moon. Now I was forced to slow down. I could see almost nothing, and I needed to let my eyes adjust to the darkness. I was scared already, but what I saw about 30 feet in front of me was the start to a nightmare I could never have. Even imagine standing in the middle of the road was what looked to be a man staring straight at the ground. Once I got closer, I discovered the man had almost nothing in common with me. He wasn't wearing clothes, but that wasn't the strange part. It appeared he was made of sticks, not sloppily with 3 or 4 sticks, but what looked to be thousands upon thousands of sticks, carefully placed with no gaps between them. I was still about 10 feet away from him when he revealed his final deformity. He slowly lifted his head to show a featureless face. The only human-like feature was 2 oval-shaped indents where eyes should be. Him being in the middle of the only road home forced me to walk right by him. I wasn't any more scared than I had been before, just curious. I continued walking towards him, his only sign of interest being that his head would follow me. Even though he had no eyes, it appeared he still was capable of sight. It was time to pass him. I kept an eye on him to see what he would do as I briskly strode past him. Fortunately, he didn't take one step. He just shifted his body to keep watching me. I sighed with relief and kept going. I looked forward again and stopped dead in my tracks. There were more of them. This time there were 3 of them standing in a driveway on the right. A little girl, a man, and a woman. I could tell they were not men because they were wearing dresses, but being made of sticks, they didn't flow. The dresses were rigid, reminding me of the woman that symbolizes a woman's restroom. I kept walking towards them, my eyes locked with the man's, as he and his family watched me pass. Once I had gone past them, I looked forward. They were everywhere, and driveways standing in the road and walking up and down the street. Some of them ignored me, but some of them took an interest and watched me walk. I chose one in particular to look at. It was a little girl no larger than 3 feet tall. Skipping towards me, I stopped and watched as she skipped right past me and disappeared into the night. I breathed a sigh of relief, as that confirmed they were not in fact hostile. With newfound confidence, I bravely strode down the road, ignoring them. Finally, I arrived at my house. As I strode down the driveway, I noticed that there was one stick man standing directly in front of the front door. As I approached him, I could see that this one was different. He was different in a way that both disturbed and intrigued me. He had a mouth and a lump on either side of his head that looked to be a croupier. Now I was face to face with him, and he wasn't moving. I started to push him aside when his arm shot out at his side, blocking my path. In a moment of frustration, I yelled, "What do you want from me?" Strangely enough, he replied in a raspy voice that sounded like it had only been used once before. He said, "Nothing, just to watch, to wait." I gasped and stepped back. He continued, "But now it is time for another watcher to join us. We are here to escort her." He then turned around, opened my door, and walked in. Cautiously, I followed him. The watcher walked through my unlit house like he lived there. As he silently descended the stairs to my daughter's room, I began to become worried. The door at the bottom of the stairs opened with a loud, long creak, and he walked through it. Trailing behind him, I stood in the door frame as I watched him pick up my 7-year-old daughter Jessie from her bed. "W, what do you want from her?" I stuttered out. "It is her time," was the only reply I got. As he walked toward me, Jessie in his arms, I saw a change in her. She was no longer completely human. I could see that she was turning into one of them, starting at the extremities and moving to her heart and head. Her ears, nose, and eyes were slowly becoming lumps on her face. Maybe it was because of fear. Maybe I knew I couldn't stop him, but for whatever reason, I let the watcher walk right out of my house with her. I stood there afraid and confused as the monster purposely walked out of my house with my daughter. I decided to follow him. He was already outside, so I sped up the stairs and into the driveway. Once my eyes adjusted, I could see there were 2 lines of watchers on either side of my door, leading all the way into the forest on the opposite side of the road. There being only one way to go, I walked down the funnel the watchers had created and slowly caught up to my daughter's taker. As we reached the forest, I realized it was to dance to continue after him. Right as he was about to disappear into the woods, I quietly said, "Why her?" The watcher stopped dead in his tracks and gave me an eerily simple response. She was alone and disappeared into the Black Forest. Story 3. I will never work for McDonald's ever again. Just to preface, I have a lot of scars on my arms, not because I harm myself, but because my father likes to get wasted and beat me, sometimes with the beer bottles he smashes after he's done drinking. So yeah, I have scars. Scars from all of the horrible shit I've gone through over the years. They go from my wrist up to my elbows, reminding me of all the times I had to protect myself from my father's drunken rage. Because of this, I wear long sleeves at work. That way nobody will make asshole remarks about them. Now, I had been at the McDonald's in my hometown for over 2 years, mostly working nights. One day, When I came in, I noticed a sign taped to the ice cream machine, broken. Not an uncommon thing to happen, but we had just gotten it fixed the week previous. Whatever, I thought. One less thing for me to clean. At around midnight, I was washing the windows across from the counter. All of a sudden, I heard a low humming sound. I turned around to see where it was coming from. It was the ice cream machine. This was weird, considering it was supposedly broken, but I had known some of our appliances to spring back to life without warning, so I wasn't too spooked by it. I walked over to shut the thing off. At about 5 feet away from the counter, I felt what seemed like water running down my arms. I thought it might have been a chill, but as I moved closer, the coolness turned to fire. I felt sharp pains wrapping around my arms, then moving up to my shoulders and down my back. I stopped walking and rolled up my left sleeve. At first, everything looked fine, nothing unusual. I took another step forward before it hit me, and then looked back at my arm. My scars, they were gone. I quickly rolled up my other sleeve to check. It was the same. No scars in sight. I felt another watery sensation on my back, as if a whirlpool had opened up in my skin. I touched at the area under my shirt and felt it. Skin, not properly healed. Was it my scars? Freaked out, I backed up towards the windows. I watched my wounds as they slithered back onto my arms where they had been made. I froze for a moment, then took a few steps forward. My scars moved once again. I moved back and forth towards and then away from the counter a few times. Every time I stepped forward, my scars squirmed around like worms in the dirt. When I moved away, they went back into place. How was this possible? What was causing my wounds to travel around my body? Once I got used to my scars' movement, I decided to search for some answers. I looked behind the counter, near the fryolator, and further back by the grills. Then I noticed something. The ice cream machine had stopped humming. As I moved toward it, my scars began frantically snaking around my skin. Upon closer inspection, I noticed that the damn thing wasn't even plugged in. I opened up the lid, looked inside, and saw a silver liquid sloshing around where the ice cream normally was. I reached my hand towards it, if only out of curiosity. As my fingertips touched the surface, it stopped moving and my entire hand went numb. I felt a strange feeling come over me in the form of a thought. Was it alive? I put my hand in a little further and felt something within the wet metal. It was rough to the touch, but perfectly round, a metallic sphere of sorts. I tried to pull at it, but when I did, the liquid began crawling up my arm. Frightened, I pulled back and ran right out of the store, without even so much as saying anything to my manager. I got in my car and drove home, truly terrified of whatever it was I had felt. The next morning, I woke up on the floor of my bedroom. A sudden dizziness compelled me to grab my head. It was warm, borderline feverish. Was the night before just a weird nightmare? Or did I smoke too much after getting out of work? Frazzled, I made my way to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. I placed my hands on both sides of the sink, staring deeply into my own eyes. I then inhaled, closed my eyes, and lowered my head. When I opened them, I noticed it. They were gone. I raised my arms closer to my face, twisting them side to check all around. My hands then darted to my back. They weren't there either. I quickly shut the door to the bathroom and locked it. I undressed and scanned every inch of my body. My scars had vanished. Feeling born anew, healed from the troubles of my past, I exited the bathroom with my head held high. I didn't know how or why, but I was thankful, completely elated. I decided to go about my day, venturing down to the kitchen for some breakfast. As I rummaged through the fridge, I heard a loud thud come from the direction of my father's bedroom. I glanced down the hall and noticed that the door was closed. I tiptoed over and cracked it open a bit, careful not to wake the beast. The room was pitch black. He had hung a blanket in front of the window to block out the light, as he often did when hungover. I felt along the wall for the light switch. When I flicked it on, I saw my father laying on the floor, his face beaten in. On his arms were scars, but not just any scars. They were mine. I would recognize them anywhere. Next to him was a metallic silver sphere. I didn't think. I didn't scream. I didn't do anything that I probably should have. I just ran. Written by R.L. Rogers. Click here to join R.L. Rogers' official subreddit. Story 4. How to Succeed in Publishing Without Really Trying. Hey, you. Yes, you at the bar there, the blonde, want to hear a story? Well, all things considered, you're alone in a bar on All Hallows. Don't look at me like that. That's what today is called. But hey, if you want to hear one, I'd be the guy to ask. I used to be an author, you know. Damn good one, too. But those days are long behind me. So, about that story, you want to hear it? I'll take that as a yes, then. A few years ago, I was in a rut. I was fresh out of college with some bullshit degree or other. Yeah, it could have been creative writing. Either way, I had no job and my landlord was ready to evict me. To save my ass, I slogged down to Harper and Row Publishers in the rain one day so I could submit one of my short stories to their editors. It was a good story, too. It was about this killer who picked up his victims in bars. Easy, sweetheart. It was just a story. No need to jump like that. Anyway, I was standing in some bigwig editor's office as he looked over my submission. He was murmuring and scribbling notes onto a legal pad as he read. Occasionally, he'd look up at me and nod before going back to reading. Half an hour later, he put down my manuscript and motioned for me to sit down. Look, kid, you've got guts, but you don't have too much else. This, he paused, thing you gave me has no commercial value whatsoever. There's no market for it. In addition, it quite frankly needs to be burnt. That's how bad it is. Kid, I did my part and entertain the notion of publishing it, but I honestly don't think I can. Sorry, kid. Then he leaned back in his leather chair and buzzed his secretary in to show me out. By 7 o'clock that night, I'd shown my story to practically every publishing house in New York. Every one of them had either turned me down or kicked me to the curb. Quite a few of them did both. I was at the end of my rope when my landlord gave me the ultimatum of 2 days to pay. How in hell's name was I going to sell this story? Defeated, I slogged back to my studio apartment. Flinging my sorry ass onto the couch, I looked up at the water-stained ceiling, screaming up at the gross cracked plaster. I begged any power, benevolent or otherwise, to grant me the ability to write. I offered my soul, my hands, even my left shoe to get just an ounce of talent. Then, mercifully, I blacked out. Let me tell you, sweetheart, waking up wasn't too much fun. My ribs ached, and there was a pit in my chest. like something had been torn out of it. I moaned and stumbled into my apartment's tiny kitchenette. Pouring myself a cup of coffee, I sat down at my minuscule table. All of a sudden, I got this idea. It was terrifying. I just had to write it down. I pulled my laptop over to me and feverishly began to write. The 5-page story I wrote that night went on to be included in more anthologies than Stephen King. Come to think of it, you may have heard of it. It was about some Russian scientists keeping people awake for days. Anyway, let's continue, shall we? My Russian sleep story was just the beginning. I was churning out mind-scrabbling stories that kept people's minds awake for days. They were hair-raisingly terrifying. Publishers were basically eating out of my hand, begging for my manuscripts. My work was in practically every bookstore in the country. Authors submitted their work to me in hopes of getting into one of my many anthologies. I was at the top of my game, and not a single person could bring me down. Strangely enough, even beautiful women like yourself enjoyed sharing my company, and I loved theirs. But though all my success and fame, there was an undertone of fear and a sense that I had lost something. One day, after getting off of a call with my agent, he came. He stood in front of my big, polished-out desk. I'd long since moved out of my studio apartment. He had on a well-tailored Armani suit and a rose buttoner. He seemed perfectly normal, perfectly human. I wish I had never looked away from his astonishingly green eyes. He had no feet. Well, none to speak of. They were hooves, night black hooves. The more that I looked at him, the more I noticed. His fingernails were long and buffed to a wicked point. He had 2 small bumps on either side of his forehead. His eyes, though blindingly green, had no pupils. Then he spoke to me. "Good evening, sir. I believe you owe me your soul." Mouth agape, I tried to protest. He silenced me by raising a hand. "Sir, we made a deal. You gave me your soul and I gave you talent. Now your soul, if you please." I stammered. Please, don't take me. I could find others. Why, you could take them." He smiled, a forked tongue whisking by his teeth. "Of course. If you find me someone else, I could free you." But his smile grew wider. "You've just buried yourself further in the devil's bargain." The relief creeped across my face, and I visibly relaxed, letting out a sigh. My relaxation spurred something in him, and he barked at me. "This won't be so easy, sir. I demand 1 human soul per week from you. If you fail to provide a soul on any given week, my -AHEM-compatriots will come and perform some damage control." He bowed. "The clock starts now, sir. I'll be waiting." Well, honey, that's my story. Pretty good, hey? Now, what do you say that you and I head back to my place? It'll be fun. We can have some wine. You could get a little tipsy. Maybe I could borrow your soul. Story 5, Voices. The swirl of voices awoke Jared from his troubled sleep. Vera, his wife, was disturbed only by his tossing and turning. She couldn't hear the voices. They were in his head, a senseless drone of overlapping whispers. Faint but present, troubled his mind. He could discern no sense or message, just knows. Naturally, he'd told nobody about the recent onset of this affliction. He rose from bed, approached the window, and stared off into his backyard, partly illuminated by the neighbor's annoying motion-detecting flood lamp. Here by the window, it seemed that the voices become more distinct or perhaps louder. Instead of a senseless swirl, he was now able to sense the definite rhythm of speech. Jared stood and focused intently, but still couldn't make anything out. The timer on the neighbor's light ran out, abruptly blotting out the view. As Jared's eyes adjusted to the deepened dark, the voices seemed to come into sharper focus. Words seemed to emerge, their forms lost in the overlapping sounds. He looked over his shoulder at his still sleeping wife. Her obese, worm-like body held no appeal to him, and hadn't for some time. At first he had drowned his frustration in alcohol, but the fire of a man's lust cannot be quenched by drink, only temporarily dulled. Looking over Vera's lumpy and rotund form, his affair now seemed an inevitability. After all, we only live once, and a man his age shouldn't be expected to settle for sexless inebriation, especially if he could have Nisa. The thought of her fired his mind, that flaming red hair and those seductive green eyes. Hers was an otherworldly beauty, fair alabaster skin, taut and supple, alluring curves, neither too slight nor too exaggerated. He longed to experience her body, and his desire was only amplified by her refusal to fully submit. She explained that she didn't want to ruin his marriage, didn't want to be the other woman, ruin his marriage. Other woman? Compared to her, there might as well be no other women. He'd made promises and offers, everything and anything she could want, but still, she'd always held back and refused. Wait, she'd said. The persistent voices wouldn't let him rest. Taking in one last look at Vera's bulk spread across the bed, he snorted his disgust and left the bedroom for the kitchen, where he poured himself a stiff drink. Perhaps a buzz could quiet the racket in his head and let him rest. The brown liquid burned his throat, but did nothing to quiet his head. Again Nisa's long frizzy hair and shiny lips pressed into his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about her, but of course he couldn't. Such was the nature of infatuation. He downed his drink, poured another, reached for his cell phone, and typed in the memorized number. Miss you. He typed into the text box and pressed send. Minutes later, Jared's cell lit up and slowly dimmed, indicating the receipt of a text. Anxiously, but clumsily, he reached for the device and read the message. Miss you too. Sup, babe. Eventually, his numb fingers were able to pound out a response. Not much. Can't sleep. Her response came quickly. I have something that might help you sleep, he typed back. Why don't I come by and show you? Smiley face that gave Jared pause. He checked the time. 12:34. It was late. No doubt he could slip out without Vera hearing, but he had work in the morning, and staying up late would make it all the worse tomorrow. Then again, he was already up, and how could he pass the opportunity to stroke that skin, to taste those lips? Maybe tonight she'd finally surrender to him. Why deny such pleasure to lessen future misery? It's a date, he typed back. Be there in 10. 10 minutes still heaven, he mused. Plenty of time for one more drink. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. He stumbled down the street towards the agreed meeting place. He could see her black Ford parked near a street light. As he ambled along, he saw her interior light go on as Nisa stepped out of the car to meet him. She was a sight to behold in a flowing pink dress, the top plunged deeply at the neck, advertising her full cleavage, and the bottom was just short enough to reveal the tops of her stockings. The clasps of her garter belt and the flawless white of her thighs. She stood daintily as he eagerly approached her. "Have you been drinking?" she asked in a catty manner. Jared held up his hands. "Am I that obvious? I can tell," she responded. "It's in your face and eyes." Without hesitation, she approached and wrapped her arms around him, looked alluring into his eyes, and kissed him sweetly on the mouth. Her body gave no resistance or protest as his hands hungrily explored the smooth curves of her body. Nisa pulled away, giggling playfully, smiling at him. "So, do you want to get coffee or just go play somewhere?" he asked, hoping of the latter. "I was thinking we could go somewhere and talk about us." She hesitated. "And maybe play a little," she added with a wicked smirk. A talk about us? Jared's addled mind fixated on hopeful thoughts. Sounds like a plan. "Hop in, I'll drive," she said. He licked his lips as he watched her hips sway around the hood of the car. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. It seemed like she had been driving for a while, but then he hadn't really been paying attention. The dissonance of voices continued to swirl in his head and had slowly grown louder, though they didn't drown out any of the ambient sounds of the car, road, or of Nisa's conversation. It was as though they came to him through a separate sense. He wasn't hearing, but experiencing them. The sound of the tires changed from pavement to gravel, and Jared noticed that they were driving down a dirt road without street lamps. "Where the hell are we?" he slurred out. "Just a little town I grew up in," she responded. "We're going to a place an old flame used to take me. There are a lot of memories at this place, and I'd like you to be part of them," she said with a sweet smile. She turned her headlights off and took a hard right down a narrow path into the woods, the way ahead illuminated only by the red running lights. After bouncing with the Ford suspension for a few hundred feet, Nisa stopped the car and looked at Jared. "I've been doing some thinking, and I've come to some decisions about us." Jared looked at her hopefully. Nisa continued, looking at him seriously. "I think it's time you left her." Jared couldn't conceal the joy on his face. "And I think we should start fresh together." She leaned across him, bracing herself with one hand on his hip as she opened the glove box and pressed the trunk release button. She winked at him and got out of the car. He climbed out of the passenger door and met her by the now open trunk. "When I was a kid, we used to come here to cuddle by the fire and watch the sunrise. I want to experience that again tonight." She gripped his hand and squeezed. "And be together." She pulled a shovel from the trunk and led him to a place on the ground. "But first, we need to dig a fire pit so that we don't burn down the whole forest." She handed him the shovel and pointed at the spot. "So please, dig." Jared thought it odd, but a fire would be romantic, and he would do anything to possess her. As he cleared away the leaves and branches where Nisa had pointed, the voices began pounding in his head, louder, more insistent, yet clearer than ever. "I'll gather some wood," she said from behind him. As the spade cut into the soft ground, the internal din intensified. With each shovelful, Jared became more aware that the voices were all speaking the same words, only disunited. As the hole widened and deepened, they moved more into harmony, making the speech both clearer to grasp but harder to understand, as if an echo were overpowering its own origin. Jared worked with greater ferocity, driven to finally understand. The blade of the shovel smashed through buried sticks and rocks and squelched as the ground turned damp, then wet. The voices became a deafening chorus, and the shovel struck something unyielding. Jared bent and found the ground muddy and liquid, as though he were standing in a swamp. Reaching into the mud, his fingers found a large, smooth object. As Jared groped, he noticed the hole was littered not with rocks and sticks, but with bones, femurs, ulnas, ribs, some smashed by his shovel, others intact. Jared's fingers found purchase on the smooth object and lifted. He raised it into the moonlight and stared down in fascination as the red-tinged mud dripped away, revealing an elongated, inhuman skull with curling segmented horns. As he stared into its empty eye sockets, the voices finally moved into an echoing, coherent scream in his mind. "Will be enough now. Join us." Jared's focus broke as pain struck. Blood poured from the deep slash across his throat, spilling to the ground and onto the horn skull. As his life drained and his vision blurred, it seemed that a blackened tongue slid out of the skull's mouth and lapped at the flowing red ichor. The voices fell silent as his lifeless body joined the tangle of corpses in the mass. Crave Niece's delicate fingers wiped the knife clean and lifted the skull up to her face. She gently stroked its contours, smearing Jared's blood onto the dry, thirsty bone. "Not enough yet," she whispered to it, "but soon, my love." She kissed a toothy, skeletal grin, staining her lips red. Carefully, gently, she placed the skull back on the blood-soaked ground and set to work filling. In the hole, the fresh kill would help feed and restore him, but more was needed, and she would bring it. Story 6. Stairs, his eyes open to the sound of his Alice's bedroom door squealing open. Sleep tugged at him, but his parental sense demanded that he get her back into bed. He heard her bare feet slap on the naked floorboards as he rolled out of the warm envelopment of his blankets. He clumsily put on his slippers and stumbled out into the living room. At the apartment, she had always slept fine, even when she had been a baby. It was only since the move to this house that she had started acting strangely in the night, getting up, wandering the house, talking to her friend. The kid seemed a bit old to invent an imaginary friend, but it was an improvement. The first few nights in the house, Alice had woken the whole neighborhood screaming. From the kitchen wafted the sound of soft weeping. He followed and was greeted by an unexpected sight. His tiny daughter, dressed in her nightgown, standing in front of the open basement door. She just stood there, looking down into the basement, quietly sobbing. He thought it strange she had not put on the light, and even stranger that she would stand in front of the scariest place in the house, alone, in the dark. He approached her, put his hand on her shoulder, and gently suggested, "Let's go back to bed, honey." Without looking or acknowledging him, she slowly lifted her arm and pointed down into the basement. Had she thought she had heard something? Was that why she was up? He let his eyes follow her finger into the blackness. Softly, comfortingly, he said, "There is nothing down there, honey. Let's go back to bed." Without even looking at him, she just continued to sob and point. Something felt wrong, but he had to put a stop to this behavior. She needed to feel safe in her new home and to put away all these childish fears. Explanations hadn't worked. Now he had to show her. He stepped down onto the first creaking wooden step, leaned forward, and flipped the light switch. The illumination shocked his eyes, but fortified his resolve as he heavily strode down to the very bottom of the stairs. With confidence in his voice, he looked about and proclaimed, "Nothing down here. Honey, I don't know what you heard, but silently and abruptly the light went out. Terror-struck, he looked back up the stairs. There his daughter stood in silhouette, no longer pointing, but standing motionless. Eyes wide, he watched the door, as though swung by a powerful unseen hand, swing shut, leaving him in the most utter of darkness. He bounded up the stairs once, twice, stopped and reached forward for the knob and escaped. He reached, but his hand found nothing. He swung wildly at the wall for the switch, but found only smooth, bare wall. Gingerly he stepped forward and continued to reach. Surely the door must be closed. Enough to feel by now. Slowly he took another step, his hands blindly groping into the nothingness ahead, and his feet constantly misjudging the next step. One more step, two more, 3, 4. He climbed, and his speed and panic increased. It had already been at least several floors worth of stairs. How was this possible? Maybe he should try to go back down. It would be easier. Remembering that the basement stairs ran under his own bedroom, he cried for his wife, Vanessa. His voice seemed unusually loud, as if in a confined space, and echoed back towards him from below. Essa, Essa, Essa. The echo pushed him beyond attempting to rationalize this insanity, and settled to any contemplation about going down. No, going down into inky echoing nothingness seemed like a very bad idea. Better to go up into inky silent nothingness. Cautiously, sightlessly, he resumed his climb, feeling ahead into nothing with his outstretched hands. So many stairs, and his legs ached. He turned and sat on the step. Alone, he felt a solitude more complete than he had ever known. Darkness, desperation, and despondency mixed in his soul as tears began to flow. What was that? He sat bolt upright and held his breath. Was that a sound? He strained his ears, to only perceive the pounding of his own veins. Then, distantly, slightly, maybe, like a scrape or a whisper, or just a shifting of air, sound seemed to echo up from below. Adrenaline poured into his veins and overrode his fatigue. He rose and heedlessly dashed up the stairs. Several times he tripped and battered himself on the steps, but still he rose and charged on. Yes, he was sure now. At first barely audible, but rising steadily, a roaring, whirling white noise. It seemed to be all around him, engulfing him, drowning out all other sound and sense. Blindly, his senses overwhelmed, he frantically sprinted up until, falling, impact, pain, rolling, hurting, breaking. It was late the next morning when Vanessa finally awoke. She wrapped herself in her terry cloth bathrobe and made her way towards the kitchen. As she passed Alice's room, her maternal instinct led her to open the door a crack and check in. Her mind was not awake enough to realize the incongruity of the child's room, dark, with all the shades drawn, and the closet door, in front of which Alice sat, wide open. Morning, honey. No response. What are you doing? Do you know where Daddy is? With an uncharacteristically serious expression, Alice slowly turned her head and responded in her tiny voice. Talking to my friend. Vanessa withdrew to the kitchen to make her coffee. It took an hour or so for her to finally open the door and find his battered and beaten body at the bottom of the basement stairs. Later, the coroner would speculate that he had run flat into the closed door at the top of the stairs, had fallen back and broken his neck, and several other bones as he tumbled down. The only really odd thing was that he was so bruised and battered from such a short fall down so few stairs. Story 7. Outside Lights. Hope didn't like being home without her parents. All of her friends did, and they had all shared wild tales of what exactly they had done when their parents were gone. They all seemed to get a sense of satisfaction at disobeying their parents and defying their rules. Hope didn't have a rebellious streak. It wasn't that she was a goody to shoes. It was just that her parents had always been reasonable with her, and in turn, she complied with their wishes. On this particular night, Hope's parents had gone out for dinner and a movie, and probably wouldn't be back until very late at night. Hope flopped down on the couch and picked up her book. It was a novel by Stephen King. Before long she was beginning to grow a little nervous. Her eyes flitted around the room. Seeing she was still alone, she relaxed a little before noticing the open door that led into the kitchen. The light in the room was out, and the darkness was unsettling. Hope couldn't shake the feeling that something inside the kitchen was watching her, perhaps leering with a sinister grin. Hope tried to continue reading her book, but kept getting distracted. At last, she finally got up and ran towards the kitchen door. She slammed it shut and drew back in one quick movement, as if expecting a hand to snake out of the blackness and grab her wrist. Needless to say, this did not happen. She let out a sigh of relief and even laughed at herself a little before going back to the warm comfort of the couch. Instead of retrieving her book, Hope simply grabbed the remote and flicked on the television. She reached over and turned off the lamp on the nearby nightstand before adjusting herself on the couch. Curling into a cozy position, the television was displaying a rerun of the newest Criminal Minds. Hope swiftly changed the channel to the Cartoon Network. She had had enough scary stories for one night. She glanced ruefully at her library book, which was now discarded on the floor. Hope slowly turned her head back to the television screen and, in her snug posture, gradually fell asleep. About an hour later, Hope was awoken by a sudden stream of light hitting her face. The light was shining in through her window. She winced and turned away, moaning softly and cursing the light for interrupting her slumber. Just as suddenly as the light had come, it was suddenly gone. Thinking that a car must have come up her street, Hope shut her eyes and tried to blot everything out, from the blaring of the TV to the gentle rain that was beginning to fall outside. The light came again, cutting through the window and illuminating the living room before shutting off once more. It seemed to be coming in short and long bursts. Hope blinked sleep from her eyes before sitting up. Why are there lights coming from outside at this time of night? She wondered to herself. And why are they coming in quick bursts like that? She eventually realized that one of her neighbors must have a faulty garage light. Thinking well of herself for having solved such a mystery, Hope turned to the television and, grabbing the remote, turned the volume up a few notches. Then something very peculiar happened. The television shut off. The power had gone out. Power outages themselves were not uncommon where Hope lived, and it really did not surprise her. What did surprise her was how the light outside kept flicking on and off. Hope realized that the light that was flashing outside couldn't be a garage light. Now that the power was out, fear welled up inside of her, and her heart began to beat fast. What if someone is trying to lure me outside? She thought I might be being stalked by a madman. She realized that she was trembling all over and she grabbed a blanket from the far end of the couch. That's when a more disturbing thought hit her. What if he can see me right now? Hope looked at the window, and a feeling of unease crept over her. She definitely had the distinct feeling that she was being watched. Hope made up her mind, then and there, what she would do. In a quick movement, she vaulted herself over the couch and huddled in the darkness. The flashing lights continued and seemed to grow more insistent, more impatient. Hope crawled along the floor before reaching up and grabbing the doorknob to the kitchen. She slowly turned it and slipped inside. She shut the door behind her, blocking out the flashing of the lights, but she could still see them underneath the crack of the door. She moved through the darkness and grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter. She sat down in one of the chairs at the far end of the kitchen and watched as the lights became slower, as if discouraged, before eventually stopping altogether. Relief flooded over her, and in spite of herself, she let out a smile. An hour later, Hope's parents came home. They opened the front door and were greeted with silence. They called out Hope's name and got no response. When they went into the kitchen, a ghastly sight awaited them. Hope sat in one of the chairs at the far end. A horrible expression of shock was evident on her face, and her throat had been torn into by a vicious blade. Hope's own kitchen knife lay useless on the floor beside the chair. The police came immediately after Hope's parents called and began searching the grounds around the house. At once they were very surprised to find a young teenage girl close to a ditch across the street from their house. There were multiple stab wounds all over her body, and it was quite obvious she had been murdered in the same manner. Hope clutched in the girl's hand was a small flashlight. She had been trying to signal for help and trying to warn whoever was inside Hope's house. Bonus stories. Story 1. A hollow realization. When my grandmother died, I was on the cusp of 28. My memories of her were bittersweet and lingered somewhere between fondue parties and a not-so-subtle disdain for my mother. Despite this, I was heartbroken when I lost her. Maybe it was guilt in having not spent enough time by her bedside. Maybe it was seeing a piece of my own childhood die as well. Maybe that's why she keeps coming to visit me. It's been twice now. The first time I was paralyzed with fear. Who among you wouldn't be after seeing your grandmother appear exactly as she did the day she died? Mouth slightly agape. The pain of a 4-year battle with cancer still present despite having finally receiving her so-called sweet release. When she disappeared, I was all too certain it was a waking nightmare. This explanation pacified me, but on a more visceral level I knew it was a load of shit. Something wasn't right. The second time it happened, I was clutching my windowsill and trying desperately not to vomit. After yet another night of binge drinking, my grandmother appeared beside me. I knew she'd arrived, but I was too petrified to look this time, and I didn't have to. I could feel her presence, and I knew she wasn't there to comfort me. Sooner or later I had to turn around if I ever wanted to leave the bathroom. The urge to vomit was replaced by fear, and each breath I took was more cumbersome than the previous. I faced her, and that was when I saw her burst into flames. Her arms were outstretched, and her head was rotating in a grotesque, carousel-like fashion, just slow enough for me to make out her features, which were contorted in pain. I vomited everywhere, and she disappeared. I slowly shimmied my back down against the cool tile of my bathroom wall and laid down. Never before had I felt equal parts shame and fear even as an alcoholic. There is something fundamentally wrong with my life, and in a post-puke moment of rare clarity I understand this, but there is something wrong with my grandmother's afterlife, and I am not sure what to think about that. I pondered telling my mother, but why she didn't shed a single tear when her mother died, and in the true Pappas family fashion, it's likely I will carry on that tradition at her funeral, too. 2 days passed without a visit, and I was starting to return to normal. I succumbed to my desperate lifestyle that I tried to pretend was alluring and chic. My previous moment of clarity disappeared faster, and the plastic seal around the bottle of bourbon I was about to nurse for the next several hours. I lifted my glass to my lips, and they began to burn. I closed my eyes in ecstasy. This was the first drink I'd had since the incident, and it was everything I needed in that moment. I tipped the glass all the way back, and it hit me. Not the glass, the realization. It hit me so hard my entire life passed before my eyes in an instant. Wasn't this supposed to happen only to those who were dying? I started to hyperventilate. I learned the purpose of my grandmother's visits. She was in hell, and she wanted to tell me something. My grandmother, a virgin until marriage. My grandmother, a tri-weekly Catholic Church attendee. She was in hell for eternity, and if she's in hell, what chance have I got of not joining her one day? Story 2, a campfire story of sorts. December 10th, 2003. My frozen hands tremble as I fumble to work my little butane lighter. The tips of my fingers are raw and blooded already, and I wince in pain with every failed attempt to spark a flame. Finally, I achieve a jittery fire which impatiently dances atop the lighter. I carefully lower it to my pile of kindling, and the fire cautiously creeps out and spreads until it is a healthy size. I watch it for a while, tending to it until it's strong. Now there is enough light to see around me, and enough heat to survive the night here deep in the forest, with everything frozen and quiet. The only light and sound comes from my fire. It is the whole world to me right now. It dances and sings in a raspy, crackling voice to me, and I am happy to enjoy its company. I can almost imagine that I can hear it whispering and babbling happily. It's so cold. I must be tired. I'm hearing things. The popping and sizzling of the fire is really beginning to sound like words. Maybe I'm just lonely out here. Maybe I just really want someone to talk to. So I'm hearing coherence in the chaos of the fire. I could have sworn I heard it say, "It's so cold." There it was again, softer this time. I lean closer to the blaze, and its warmth caresses my face, setting me at ease. I'm listening intently now, anxious for what I'll hear next. If you let me die tonight, you'll die tonight. There was no mistaking it. It said it clearly, albeit in the raspy, sing-song voice of a fire consuming wet branches. Yet even as the words become clearer, they become softer, drawing me in closer to make out the next statement. The warmth splashes over me as I inch my face closer, and the frost that had settled in my bones begins to thaw. The fire is speaking constantly now, chattering quietly to itself, and I can only pick out bits of words and portions of sentences. Get closer. Watch closely. If I die, you die. I'm the only thing keeping you alive. Pay attention. The fire ends its tirade with a loud snap of burning wood and then is quiet. I lean in even closer, eager to receive whatever secret is coming next. The heat is no longer pleasant. It sears me as the flames playfully lick at my face. The fire is being coy, teasing me with its silence to see how long I will wait on it. The smoke reaches into my nostrils, and the embers float carelessly from the heart of the fire into my eyes, which are now welling with ash. I don't care. I just want to hear what comes next. Get closer. Pay attention. Watch closely, now more than ever. December 17th, 2003. In other news, the charred body of an unidentified man was found deep in the mountainous forests east of the city. Investigators have stated that the man appeared to have caught fire while sitting by his campfire and, inexplicably, did not appear to have made any effort to extinguish himself. His burned remains were found, frozen in position by the icy temperatures, leaning over the ashes of a long-extinguished fire. In what is perhaps the most bizarre detail of the grisly scene, the man is reported to have been found with an expectant smile still on his face. Story 3. I'm here now. Shh. It's okay, baby. I'm here now. She coos into my ear, stroking my feverish cheek as I sit still in her gentle embrace. She hums a soft tune I've never heard before. I can't believe it's already been a whole hour since I first woke up, and I'm still shaking. I had opened my eyes to the silent, still room. I normally had my little table fan on when I went to bed. I can't sleep without hearing something, anything my Scooby-Doo night light had turned out as well, that I definitely can't sleep without. I sit up in my bed, the covers to my chin, and I look around the dark room, my eyes just barely able to see from the faint glow of the street lights outside and the pale glow of the waning crescent moon, with nothing seeming out of the ordinary beside the eerie silence and the lack of a glowing dog head. I cautiously slip out of bed and over to the fan, flicking it on. It's wiring back to life and churning the stiff, dead air calms me. I stumble over the blanket wrapped around me and replug the fluorescent hero hound back into the electrical socket. Rolling back into bed and getting comfy, I glance over at my clock in the distance, and I always get my 2s and 3s mixed up. Either way, it was much too late, early for me to be up past my bedtime. Moments late, maybe a few seconds or several minutes, I don't know. I wake up again to the sound of a car horn. The first thing I notice is that my room is yet again dark and quiet, no fan and no Scooby. The second thing I notice, my window is open. Now I know without a doubt that I close my window before going to bed, for fear a bat might come in through it and suck my blood or turn me into a vampire or whatever else they do in Daddy's scary movies. I call out to my parents in a fit of shaky panic. Maybe 10 seconds later, they rush in, Teddy wielding his old baseball bat and Mommy with a phone in one hand and Grammy's knitting needles in the other. They both look around for a good minute and then over at me concerned, finding nothing awry or aflame. I lay out the spiel of my plea for help, and they both take a relaxed breath. Teddy goes to my window, looks out at the grass a full story below, and closes my window, stating, matter-of-factly, that the latch has just been worn and that it must have opened on its own. Mommy sits beside me on the bed and tousles my hair. They both reassure me that everything is okay and that if I want I can sleep in bed with them for tonight. It wouldn't be the first time. I finally say no after some deliberation with them and with myself, and they leave. Oh, why did they leave? Why did they have to leave me here alone I'm still shaking, and my throat keeps tightening, and I let out a little whine every once in a while. Each time she stiffens and stops humming her lullaby. This last time she nearly jumps at my little yip, and she leans forward, her lips just centimeters from my ear. She whispers softly, sweetly, "Shh, it's okay. I'm here now." She relaxes and continues petting me. "You wouldn't want to wake up your parents, now would you?" Story 4. Repossession. I can clearly make out a hospital ward. It's probably mine since I'm in its bed. It's a private room, and my low bed faces the wall. I see no windows. I turn my head. Wait. I suddenly notice restraints digging into my arms, legs, across my chest, and fixing my head into place. I realize that I can't remember anything. I don't know why I'm tied up, though I'm not sure if it's a good idea to. But I strain at my bonds, making a futile effort to get free, no matter. A doctor or nurse will come eventually. I'll ask them why I'm tied up like this. There's probably a good reason for whatever is happening. I wait. I don't think whoever I was had been especially good at sitting around and waiting. I feel a fear within me as if it were inherent. It's a fear of where I am, of what's going to happen, of who I am. My breathing slowly becomes more erratic, the uneven hissing of my breath becoming louder and louder, until all I can hear is the whistle of air entering and escaping my lungs. I lie there and wait, my fear growing with every passing moment. I hear the swish of air from a door swinging open behind me. I should have felt relief as I heard the footsteps of one entering the room, yet I couldn't. Instead, my feeling of dread heightened to one of raw terror. My heart jackhammered, and I felt a clammy, cold sweat began to trickle down my forehead. I struggled, my whole body undulating under the thick straps fettering me. The bed barely budged. I was completely trapped. The reason for my hysteria, whatever it was behind me, walked with the rhythmic, clicking footsteps of an average man. What set me off was its breathing. Its breaths were the scratchy growls of a crazed animal, intermingled with a labored panting, as if it were holding itself back from something or someone. I strain even harder, pulling every muscle in my body. The veins in my neck bulge, my eyes pop. Nothing. I hear the clanking of metal objects, and then slow, deliberate footsteps approaching me. I tremble, filled with fear. What is he holding? A shadow falls over my face, blocking out the light streaming from the unknown light source above. I can't see him. He's right above me, and I can't move. I scream. The breath I didn't realize I was holding rushed out of my lungs. A hand had entered my peripheral vision, a wrinkled ashen claw, human, but just barely. It was holding a tube with a needle at the tip. It glowed despite the brightness of the room around it. Struggling was futile, I know, but I couldn't help but writhe and scream as I felt the sting of a sharp point push its way into my arm. Behind me, an audible click sounds, and I watch as my blood slowly streams out of my body, my eyes following the dark red line too. Where it disappears from my line of vision, dark red blood, I'm assailed by a flash of memory. It's a memory of blood, dark red and flowing. I suddenly realize who's behind me and who I am. I know why I am afraid. I am a thief. I had a thirst, and I took this man's blood. I drained him. Laughing, I stopped struggling. He's merely taking back what's his. A slow but powerful lethargy washes over me, and I black out. Story 5. Men imitating things you live on your own And you tell yourself this is by choice, but really part of the reason is you were never that great with people, which is also part of the reason you live about 10 miles from the nearest town. The land was cheap, you'll say. The view is beautiful, you'll insist. Even if no one is around to ask, there is the benefit of the fact that out here you don't get nearly the amount of traffic or noise that comes with surrounding yourself with people, which is always a plus. So it surprises you a little as you prepare your dinner one night. When you think you hear a man in the woods, you stop for a moment, setting the knife down so you can hear it clearly. The sounds remind you of dogs, but the tone is not quite right. They sound more like men imitating dogs, and as time passes more join. Then, just as suddenly as they came, they were gone. You shrug it off. Coyotes, probably. Drunk men far from home, wandering the woods, possibly. You don't really care to know, though you do lock the door this night, something you don't often do. It's later this very same week that it begins raining, and you notice that once more that something sounds off. You can see the rain, you know it is there. You can see the woods, you know no one is around, and yet you find the rain sounds, not as it should, but like a man imitating rain. Unlike the dogs, you find this rather soothing. You leave the door unlocked, and you sleep in the living room, watching and listening to the off-key rain. The very next day you notice deer tracks in the mud as you enjoy a cup of coffee on your porch. Well rested from the night before, you finish your cup, suit up, and follow the tracks. The nearest market is so far away, you rather prefer to hunt and gather what you can to avoid the trip. Staying as hidden as you can, you spot the deer from a distance. You also spot what looks like a bush at first, but a harder stare tells you it is a man imitating a bush. This is private property, and from the way he looks you gather he's here to hunt. But he's too close. He's standing not 10 feet from your prey. You see he hasn't drawn any kind of gun or bow, and decide to beat him to the punch. You aim, you fire, you kill your target with practiced ease. Quickly, you start to get up, eager to see if the other man is startled, but stop when you see he has not. He instead slowly turns his head to the deer, stands, and makes the short walk over. And that's when you realize something is very wrong. He moves as if he has no defined bones or joints, very fluid and bendy. You can see now that he's at his full height, that where the leaves don't cover there are no clothes or human limbs, only thin branches bunched together in a poor replica of what they are meant to be. He shuffles over the deer for a moment before reaching down, sharp branches growing out to form too many fingers and bringing the whole thing up to consume. You realize, struck motionless with fear, that all this time it was not men imitating things. It was things imitating men. Story 6. The tipping at twilight. On a cold, windy winter evening, I sat at home, rapidly typing away on my computer. I had set up a rather quaint little blog for myself, and it was getting pretty popular. My latest post was discussing gender equality, or rather inequality. You know, it's pretty hard to be a woman, the constant catcalling when you walk down the street, the consistent online name-calling when playing the latest Call of Duty, and the worst thing of all, the fake relationship circle made up by basement-dwelling nerds, the friend zone. I finished the post at around 6:30 and quickly posted it to my blog, Thepersekitwetwan, blogspot.com. In no time at all, the post blew up with people voicing their support from all over the world. I felt pretty proud of myself. until I saw a comment that made me stop in my tracks. It wasn't anything disturbing. It was simply the letter M. The poster of the comment's profile picture contained the all-too-familiar neck-bearded face, but something about it was different. Instead of the friendly, cheerful eyes of Fedora Guy, I saw bloody, mangled sockets. Two objects that appeared to be Doritos were stabbed into the empty sockets. A plastic tube stuck through a hole in his cheek, and it had a strange green fluid pumping through it. The mere sight of it made me want to vomit. Who chooses something like that for a profile pic? The name attached to the picture was "Nicest guy, yeah, I bet," I thought to myself. A shiver went down my spine. 30 minutes later, another comment by the same poster appeared, the letter L. I heard a chip crunching sound from outside my window. By this point I was getting unnerved, but I went and watched some funny YouTube videos and then returned to my blog 30 minutes later. Another comment appeared. This was the letter A. I looked outside my window and saw a black fedora hanging from a branch of a tree. I wonder how that got up there. The letter D was next, and I heard the sound of a liter bottle of soda being opened from downstairs. This was the turning point. I locked the door to my room and tried to call 911. Crap, my phone was dead. At this point, I quickly looked back at my computer. The last comment, the letter Y. Now I realized what was happening. All the comments spelled. Lady, I heard someone walking up the stairs. I turned off my light. I heard someone walking towards my room. I hid under the bed. Suddenly there was silence. It was deafening. I started to cry. The doorknob slowly started to turn. I thought it was locked. A dark figure stepped into the room. It was so dark I couldn't make out what it was or what it was doing. But suddenly, lightning flashed outside, and I saw something that I will never forget. The hideous creature grabbed the brim of his hat, and the tipping intensified. Story 7. My haunting past. I've always had trouble sleeping at night. Noises have disturbed me my whole life. I found out years ago that I have hypersensitive hearing, picking up all sorts of background noises. They couldn't fix it, only recommend the obvious techniques to mask the problem. Not that I hadn't tried these already. Earmuffs, listening to music, and even things like meditation. None of it worked. In fact, it seemed to make it worse. It made her more desperate. I hear her most nights. No one else can. Why does she only come to me? There's always the dread of lying there each night in the dark silence, anticipating when she will come and when I will hear her again. She usually likes to wait until I am drifting to sleep, so that I jump back to my senses in fright to the sound of her there. Most of the time it begins with a faint crying. She tells me that she wants to make it end. I know she's getting closer to getting me, and some nights I can even feel her cold breath in my ear. I can sense when she is lying close beside me in the darkness staring at me, and sometimes she whispers things like it's only me, right into my ear. She's toying with me like a cat does to a helpless insect before killing it. The thing is, I could never see her, but it slowly felt like she was becoming more real. The doctor later informed me that I suffer from schizophrenia. I have been taking medication for a long time, but it wasn't really working. It just made me feel more helpless. It was difficult for a girl as young as me to deal with this. At least now I could accept that she wasn't real. It was all in my head, and there was nothing real to be afraid of. That was until last night. Last night her presence felt more real than ever. I could hear her whisper, feel the air on my neck, and even smell her breath. It was all too realistic to handle. I got so scared that I fell back into my old habit of running through the darkness of the house into my mother's, dead to sleep beside her where I felt safe. Now that I was older, I knew she was hoping I had grown out of this phase, although I had only stopped doing it because it made her sad, and I didn't want her to be disappointed in me anymore. She was all I had. If I had the choice, I would be in there beside her every night without fail. I knew my mother had been awoken by me, probably more saddened that I had reverted to old ways, and she thought the medication had been helping me. But it wasn't helping. I had just lied all this time to keep her happy, and let her sleep in peace. I curled up in bed beside her and began to sob quietly. My mum looked uncomfortable from the noise I had made and began stirring under the sheet, so I whispered into her ear, "It's only me." She sat up abruptly, looking anxious. In the darkness, I saw her reach over for her cell phone and began to dial a number. I noticed on the screen that she was calling the doctor. The voices I used to hear, she said, "They're back."